sorry, an electrical engineering client in Melbourne, who introduced flexible working arrangements. And then a year later, were wondering why no one was taking up flexible working arrangements. Turns out that line managers down the line were saying things like, yeah, you're allowed flex time, but if you take that up, let's be honest, you're never going to get a promotion. Which I'm not sure quite realizes the dream of flexible work environments, you know? So it's not just about the technology to enable it, it's about driving the behavioral change in practice, not just procurement and process, but in practice to bring these things to life. And I don't think that's just HR's job. I really don't. I think that the people in the best position to show the power of it are the technical experts as well, who kind of create the systems to make it happen. It's why I think HR and IT are crucially more and more just going to be side by side in organizations. And you've got to read the Future Work Report. Fascinating insight into some of the disjunctures that sit between HR and IT from a policy, procurement, and practice point of view at the moment. Nothing irreconcilable, nothing we can't overcome, but a really good quantification and clarification of what some of those discrepancies are. So, highly collaborative, highly flexible, and I think that implies a third thing, which is mentioned a little bit in the Future at Work study, in some of the results that came through, that I think is really the necessary corollary of these two things, and probably the most challenging of all of them. I don't know if anyone can guess what it is, but I won't kind of keep you guessing. It's high trust. If you're going to create a workplace where we empower individuals to, at their discretion, work collaboratively across the silos, if you're going to provide an infrastructure that allows highly flexible, customized working environments, then the necessary corollary is either just a truckload of process and policy and risk management tools, of which I'm sure we'll have some, or it's going to have to be an increasing level of trust and engagement levels that produce people worthy of your trust to enable them to let that happen. And trust doesn't get talked about that much in that sort of context, but it is, when you think about it, a necessary corollary. There's a major merchant investment bank well, they're multinational, but their office in Sydney. They just did like a kind of a $750 million office move from one side of the bridge to the other, and you can probably guess what I'm talking about, and into a new building, right? And one of the things they wanted to change when they moved, they took the opportunity of moving campus to try and do a bit of a cultural change operation as well. And they wanted to improve trust levels. And they started with what Pete Sheehan, in his book Flip, and I have started talking about as superficial statements of value of that cultural change. They said, we're going to unlock the stationery cabinet, and we're going to let you take whatever stationery you want. High trust, right? So anyway, they moved offices $750 million later, and they opened the stationery cabinet. End of the first week, no stationery left, right? It's just a disaster. There's people just taking pens for the sake of it and like signing out pads and just a disaster, right? So at this point, you can imagine there's a few people within the organization going, can we put the lock back on the cupboard, please? Because we're bleeding cash here in the form of stamps and pens. But the senior HR practitioner there at the time, who is just an absolute rock star, by the way, was like, no. That's not how cultural change works. This is kind of the Pantene Pro V school of it won't happen overnight, but it will happen. Cultural change. That's maybe Chloral, but I don't know my shampoos. But as would surprise you greatly, I imagine. They said, we're going to give it another go. So at the end of the first week, restock the cupboard with stationery, leave it for another week. End of the second week, stationery gone skis, nothing left. End of the third week, more stationery at the end of the week than at the start of the week. I kid you not. People had returned more stationery than they'd stolen by the end of the... More stationery, and not because they refilled it at the start of the week. They did refill it, but more at the end of the week than they started with at the start. Because A, trust takes time, and B, trust takes commitment from both sides. And from an IT perspective, I mean, we've done a lot of work with a very large multinational who are making serious plays in the collaborative technology space at the moment. And one of the biggest behavioral barriers you run up to in organizations for deployment of, say, for instance, social technologies, which I think will underpin collaboration in the future, is we're just worried about what people are going to do. Some like 53, 54% in the Future of Work study of people said our biggest concern with social technology is lost productivity through people messing about on the work time. Like if you take social technology away, that will make people who waste time not waste time anymore or something. Like we could solve these productivity tools, just take away all the distractions, that'll make them work. Doesn't work like that, by the way, as I'm sure you know. But trust takes time, and it's particularly true with technology. That I think we can achieve phenomenal things in the workplace of the future, but it's going to rely on a slight reconceptualization of trust. I just want to show the image I use to kind of understand this in my own mind. So I'd never propose anarchy, right, for virtually anything. It's been proven to not be a good model for much at all. But I think you can conceptualize risks and rules and information at business on a spectrum, right? With like information feudalism at one end, that just lock it down, throw away the key, my device, my way or the highway kind of approach to IT and process in a business, through to the kind of, I've heard Google works like this, even though they don't really kind of, what Gen Ys would probably have if they were asked without thinking about it, kind of approach to information anarchy, right? Which is just whatever you want, anytime. It's Wikipedia out there, like, change it your way, your style, anytime. And I don't think either model is very good, to be perfectly honest. In fact, both models have been proven not to work. There's a great book out of ANU called Information Feudalism that looks at information management and intellectual property law and makes basically an undisputable case that if you lock down all forms of information and communication, you kill everything. They call it the tragedy of the anti-commons, which I think is really, really cute and really nice. Drahos and Braithwaite, two great academics and practitioners of information management. So information feudalism I don't think works. Information anarchy, it just also doesn't work particularly well. Wikipedia is probably close to the biggest repository of anarchical knowledge at the moment, and even that's not anarchy, because there's a team of like 20 people who do nothing but eat, sleep, live and breathe, checking the veracity of things on Wikipedia. They're not paid to do it, but they do it nonetheless. So the pendulum is obviously somewhere in the middle, but here's my 2 cents worth, right, on the work I've done with companies around the world, and that is that when it comes to information technology, people management, and information management, the pendulum has swung far too far towards feudalism. And the next 3 to 5 years is not about throwing it all away. It's just about pulling it back a little bit. Like just opening up, so for instance, the fact that upwards of 50% of organizations surveyed in this report said that in the next 3 to 5 years, creating systems that let people use their own choice of personal technological device to access the network is going to become the norm. It's not anarchy, it's just pulling it back a little bit with sensible procedures and policies around it. And I think that the trust that is inherent in that will come to define the workplace. And more to the point, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that people like working for organizations that do that as well. It becomes a differentiated employment value proposition for the market. You can come to work for us because we trust you and we've got the policies, practices and procedures in place that prove it. IT and HR obviously are front and center in realizing all three of those things. So highly collaborative, highly flexible and built on trust. The sorts of technologies that underpin this are obviously the very sorts of technologies on show in the show a couple of doors down. Mobile technologies that put it in your hand anytime you want it, cloud-based technologies that make it permanent, social technologies that circumvent the silos and put that layer across the top that lets people communicate point to point, right stuff, right time, right way. The sessions that follow are really about drilling down on what this looks like from a series of people who have in-depth industry and practical knowledge in making this happen, rather than my sort of different industry at different time, 30,000 feet kind of view. So just to polish off, can I finish by saying 3 things really quickly? Number 1 is genuinely thank you. If it wasn't obvious, I kind of like this topic. I think it's really, really fascinating and is probably the most important thing to be front of mind for IT practitioners right now, is how do we realize this dream of potential into the future? Number 2 is good luck with it, because it poses challenges to our traditional paradigms, but if we don't want to be building for a million new horses, this is the stuff that has to sit front of mind. And number 3 is really enjoy the rest of today, because there's some cracking sessions coming up, and make sure you take a look at the research, because it'll stimulate some thinking, absolutely, no doubt. So thank you very much indeed. Have a cracking rest of the day, and good times. Cheers.